Faithfulness is a needed quality of life, but it is difficult to achieve. How can persons be faithful in difficult situations? Noah is an empowering example of someone who remained faithful to what God asked him to do, regardless of the opposing circumstance and consequences. Most people are familiar with Noah as someone who built a huge boat to house his family and every species of animal during the worldwide flood. That moment in history may seem like the most memorable slice of his life, but what Noah did before this famous voyage is especially worth paying attention to. Despite being as imperfect as anyone, the Bible describes Noah as blameless in comparison to others in his era who lived wicked lives. His part of God's story is primarily found in Genesis chapter 5 through 9, making him one of the patriarchs of our faith, individuals with whom God established a foundational covenant in order to recreate hope for everyone else from generation to generation. And that brings us to our key Bible verse for today, which reads, "So Noah did everything exactly as God had commanded him." Genesis chapter 6, verse 22. By living a righteous life, he felt the pleasures of faithfulness. It is what happens when we do what God has asked and help recreate this world back into what he originally intended. We experience the joy he hardwired into how things were meant to be experienced. We move from have to get to when we will faithfully protect and preserve the things we care about. When we truly know someone, we do things more out of trust than out of the person explaining all the details. Noah was a father to 3 boys, and according to verse 10, so he knew something about trying to keep them safe in a world of violence, as described in verse 11. They had to trust his perspective as their father, despite not knowing all he knew, just as Noah had to trust God's perspective and instructions. Like a father and son relationship, God and Noah had built a special kind of intimacy and trust over time as Noah lived righteously. It allowed them to form a covenant in the midst of it all. Even if Noah didn't understand the purpose of every detail, he did it all. We tend to struggle with this most after experiencing great uncertainty and loss. If it feels like God has let us down in protecting our loved ones, we might let the crisis overtake our trust. Faithfulness is key for us to recreate our confidence in the Lord out of truth instead of emotion. At some point in your faith journey, you see the harder things as a pathway to embrace the greater things. And so, here's our lesson. Think back to a time when you made something important to you, whether it was a project around the house or something creative. What if you knew you had to destroy it? God knew creation would be tainted by sin, yet still put his all into it. In contrast, we live in a world that makes no promises yet demands guarantees. People are generally reluctant to do even important things unless they know for sure it will be worth it, or that something will be in it for them. God instead demonstrates what it means to give his all to what matters, just as Noah shows us how to be steadfast for God even if sometimes we stand alone. The New Testament uses salvation language to refer to Noah's experience in 1 Peter chapter 3 verse 20 and 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 5, suggesting the account here should be seen more as God saving humanity from sinful self-destruction than merely as punishment for sin. We take part in this every time we stand up for the Lord, not just by saying important things before others, but in right living that shows we know what's important.